finally, I know you've all been very patient, probably a lot of questions that you've been wanting to articulate for the past couple of hours. So now is the opportunity. So I'll invite all members of the panel, or all speakers that will now become a panel, together with Monica Nogara, so I assume we'll be back up on the video screen. There she is. So we have a microphone that I think Alexandros will pass out into the audience. And yeah, please raise your hands and let us know if you have any questions for any or all of the panelists.
I have the computer.
And I got the big mic.
Thank you all for the insightful presentations. My question to Professor Wells. So you stressed the importance of building the so-called human capital in developing countries. But there's a key challenge here, the so-called brain drain. So if there's this student, this bright student from, I don't know, Nigeria, who builds some skills with regards to medicine, telecommunications, whatever, how can you convince that student to stay in Nigeria and help his country develop?
Comment on that. I think it's a valid question. On the other hand, this brings me back to the last point that the problems are the gold mines. But the students have to see that they have the skills to work and really be able to get the gold out. We saw those students working with the so-called megawatt challenge. They will not go to Sweden. They see the business opportunity to work with clean water solutions. I think that's the same. It's if you are capable and have the skills to work with the problems of your country, that is what you love to do. I think this is what we have to provide and develop.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valdo Lastro, CBSS Baltic 2030 unit. I'm old enough to remember Rio conference and Agenda 21 adoption, and I'm old enough to remember the adoption of the Millennium Development Goals and all that optimism which those events injected into the world and into the people, especially people like us here, working with environment and sustainable development daily basis. A question to all of you, one by one, please, if you could answer. What makes you think that we are doing this time better in implementing those wonderful goals we have agreed?
Yeah, I'd love to start with that. Maybe I was a little younger when Agenda 2021 came out, but I think you've seen more people lifted out of poverty since then than there were people on the planet 100 years ago. So I think that there's a lot that has been done without a doubt, and I don't think anyone would move away from that. And if you have a look at developing Asia 50 years ago, it's nothing compared to what it is now, this technological powerhouse developing a lot of things. So similarly, in Africa, we see it approaching Asia's growth rates. And I think what's particularly exciting is the thought that we can help streamline some of these goals into policy. And I want to use the opportunity to pick up on a comment that you made about this just being another agenda coming from New York. In actual fact, most of this is a compilation of national policy goals, and it was signed off nationally. So I don't think there's a single country in Africa, for example, where electrification rates are low, that have a policy other than getting more people electrified. So I think that's maybe a bit of a nuanced, slightly more nuanced thing than just, oh, this is something that comes from New York. So I'm very positive. I think that there's been massive progress. And I think with the age of new information and knowledge sharing and so on, it makes for a very nice setting to do more.
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think maybe, I mean, you put the question as, why is this better? Maybe that is not the way we should see it. That's how I think. Maybe we should see it more as a process. We have had different agendas. We have seen things happening. The Millennium Development Goals, for example, they were more limited when it comes to thematic areas than the global goals are, but still we achieved a lot. We reduced poverty, we increased education levels, we decreased child mortality and also at giving birth. So a general agenda that is well known to the whole world, which I think is one of the strengths of this agenda, that is, it is a very strong ownership, because all countries have actually come together, heads of states, but not only national representatives, but also private actors, other actors in civil society that have come together and discussed. And it has been a very quite long and very thorough consultative process also towards reaching the agenda, which has involved the whole world actually in formulating the agenda. So I think this gives us a very good opportunity for working towards the goals that are set in this agenda. So it makes it really based also among people.
Yeah, very good question. And in a way you can see exactly as a process, every 15 years we have one of these big summits, and it can be a good thing. It's what the international system needs. I think I'm pessimist for a couple of reasons. There's still no clear definition of sustainability or sustainable development. Everyone can still kind of read their own thing into it, but that is also the beauty of the concept. We have some persistent problems. We've had successes, like those that have been mentioned, but inequality is increasing, and consumption patterns are also a big elephant in the room here. But I think reasons for being more optimistic. Again, the partnership, and what I see is a qualitative change is the interest of the business, the private sector, which I see, there seems to be more participation and broader participation, not just from the kind of niche actors, but from bigger multinationals, etc. And secondly, this sort of technological optimism that seemed to characterize these times, and I think leading up to Paris, those charts of falling prices of renewables, I think really changed. That was a bit of a tipping point, changed the mood somewhat. So, and it's very inspiring to hear of these examples of students developing these solutions, concrete and business opportunities. And we have the communication channels, social media now, to have the sort of power of the good example. So some things I think are still problems, but then some reasons for more optimism.
Much has been said. Clearly we have seen unprecedented development the last 20 years when it comes to economic development. I mean, in terms, as you mentioned, people have left the poverty zone in a huge number. But clearly, I think what is maybe different, I would say two things would point. First of all, I think the awareness about climate change and the role of environment is very different than it was 20 years ago. If I speak to someone in China, there's a very clear understanding that CO2 emission and air quality, water quality are issues for development. And I think wherever you meet people, there is an awareness about that. So I would say it's a clear self-interest and awareness that is driving the agenda in a very different fashion than maybe 20 years ago. I think the other point is also, which was maybe not as well understood 20 years ago, is the role of business. I mean, that actually you can make money by selling solar panels or building wind farms. I mean, this understanding, and I mean, this is why I think we need more of these entrepreneurs for sustainable development, or entrepreneurship for sustainable development goals. I think this understanding in terms will also help. And maybe you, like telling your children, you prefer your children to tell, I made money by selling solar panels and not I made money by selling nice guns. So I think, but on the other hand, I think there's always a political risk. We see big challenges. I would say, just looking at Europe, I mean, you speak about a refugees crisis, which I think is a crazy word. I mean, the crisis is set as war in Syria and not the refugees coming here. So there are many political issues in Europe, which are also United States, which are more isolationist, or say, more trying to isolate yourself and not taking part of the development. And I think there is a risk, and of course in the political sphere in different countries is, I would say, rather risk. There could be some risk for backlash.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can hear me otherwise, but I was going to open up the floor to you, Monica, if you would like to answer that question as well.
Yes, well, I said, well, I would say a lot has been said already, but I would like to add that it has been it is a process, and I would like to reiterate that it is a process, but especially it's a process that has learned. We got to this point because we really have learned lessons from the past, from the MDGs, not just what we have achieved through the MDGs, but also what were the lessons from this process and the process of arriving to the 2030 agenda, to the SDGs, has been a much more inclusive and participatory process. And indeed, now we have so many more stakeholders involved that are already using the lingo of the SDGs from the private sector that has been mentioned, and various institutions all over the world, and countries themselves that already started working on this agenda even before the UN adopted the agenda itself. And so since the adoption of the SDGs, countries had already really been working on the goals and then asking internally questions how to achieve these goals. Also, I think the difference from the past is that there is a greater sense of urgency. We do see the effects of climate change, and that people are experiencing these effects in their own countries and communities and their households. And there's a greater awareness and discussions of inequality, which is what brought to the idea of leaving no one behind. The principle leaving no one behind is because there is an understanding that inequality is something that affects all countries, not just developing countries. In fact, most of the poorest lived in middle-income countries. This is a fact. And also, I think there is a sense of that this is a universal agenda, affects all countries, but also will require collective effort. So there are many more opportunities for people to get engaged and get involved and really bring their own piece of information and experience to bear. And this is, I think, is a great incentive for many groups, the social groups, and many institutions, really, to be able to have an influence which is more recognized. So I will add this point. Yeah.
Thank you, Monica. Is there any further questions? Yep. Perhaps we'll go here first, and then.
My name is Helena Lindemark, and this is actually not a question, but it's a comment or a suggestion related to what you just said. Actually, Sweden as a country has a golden opportunity right now to take advantage of the fact that 20 years before the Rio conference in 1972, we had actually the first conference on sustainable development arranged here in Stockholm. And if we link that together with the sustainable development goals, we get to, well, sort of a midterm goal to 2022. And it's easier to get action if you have a shorter perspective. Instead of, if you say that we're going to reach these goals until 2030, it's easy to say that, okay, we have still a lot of time, we're no hurry, we can do that next year. But if you set a clear vision, positive vision and goal towards 2022, 50 years since the Stockholm conference, and more or less halfway to 2030, then we can actually get action now. And we're actually, well, we have had discussions with SIDA, with the Stockholm Environment Institute, and the KTH actually, and tomorrow we're having a meeting, well, a third meeting with the government. So, yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, I think a Stockholm plus 50 sounds like a wonderful idea.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Bruce Lyon, and I'm a professor here at KTH. I'm also thinking about the 1970s, coincidentally. My professor in that era was Börje Steenberg, and I just finished reading his biography, and he came back. His career was at KTH until he was a professor emeritus, died at 102. But he spent 7 years in Rome as the head of the FAO's efforts on forestry. And in that era, the forestry efforts were aimed at reforestation. But if we leap ahead to today, we think of how important the forests are in the question of sustainability, not only supplying renewable resources, say nothing of the impact of manageable or managed forests on carbon sequestration and so forth. I just wondered, is there anything in Agenda 2030 that's aimed at creating a viable managed forests in the countries you're talking about to provide sustainable materials for development in those countries?
Could you repeat the question? Just
Is forestry on the map at all in 2030?
Yeah, Sustainable Development Goal 15, I think, which is life on land, and forests are included in there. So it's a key thing. Some things that have changed since then, though, is there's more financing that's available for reforestation and so on, and so there are some formal mechanisms. So you can now go and invest in forests, and there are a lot more guidelines. So thanks to those pioneering efforts in the 70s, which I'm sure at the time probably sounded a little bit off the wall, this is becoming streamlined. If I may, while I'm just here and talking about midterm goals, and it really is exciting to see. On the other hand, we mentioned the Bolivia case study, which was done together with UNDESA. The Bolivians took these tools, they endogenized them, made them nationally appropriate. And in fact, the young lady who is writing a number of the policy notes that government is implementing right now from this work is in fact a joint KTH UMass PhD student funded by SIDA, by the way. I should just put in a little plug there.
Thank you. Also, you mentioned the priorities of goals that governments typically have, and the first one being system goals, economic growth and employment. And then, Ramon, you just mentioned that people are realizing that there are business opportunities to be had in this, but that goal of always striving for economic growth or profitable businesses in order to motivate these sort of actions could potentially be self-defeating, is what I'm thinking. And I would like you to sort of expand on that, because I remember you had a small comment on this first goal there, if possible.
Yeah, that's a very good question on the sort of fundamentals. So that was just, again, it is not a normative categorization, it's just sort of reflecting how traditionally governments, I mean, if you look at election manifestos, there are generally more sort of promises around growth and employment and such. But the whole area of sort of degrowth, I think, is interesting. It's not something I have studied, but I know actually there are research projects on it at KTH, and what would it imply in the future of societies. So I think that's definitely an interesting research field, but I can't really comment on what is the possibility of combining growth and sustainability forever. It's a difficult one.
Yes, hello. I'm Krista Campus and coming also from the Council of the Baltic Sea States, and I'm head of Sustainable Development Unit, which is called now Baltic 2030. We were at Baltic 21 before. Thank you for very, very interesting presentations. As we are working daily basis with the governments of 11 countries around the Baltic Sea, then my question is related to policy coherence and Goal 17, because it's very big surprise that even after 20 years of collaborating on the issues related to sustainable development, there are still a lot of institutions, officials who think that sustainable development is some kind of separate sector. So that's why I think policy coherence is extremely important, because that is how, through the policies, you can really change the activities and thinking of the people and different actors. You can really initiate the big changes. What do you think, what would be the best tools for achieving policy coherence and for achieving this more holistic approach when it comes to implementation of the SDGs? How to, let's say, facilitate interlinkages between the actors in different sectors? Because I think that is the most positive thing when it comes to sustainable development goals and 2030 agenda, that they are for all, and they are not only for developing countries, but they are also for developed countries. And all of us, we have to implement it. All countries have to implement them. So it is not so much anymore, of course it is, but not so much anymore about development aid only. But it is also that all developed countries, they have to really think how they are dealing nationally, but also I would say regionally, because I'm working in macro-regional level, which is the Baltic Sea region, that how to implement nationally and regionally also those goals which are not the most relevant for them, or not the most challenging for them. So how to achieve this policy coherence and how to facilitate collaboration between the different sectors, because I see that this is the biggest challenge, and also this is related of policy coherence target, of course.
Mark? Maybe if I could start, but you know, I'm completely biased, simply, and you can see it in all of my presentations. I'm sold on this idea of having clear, coherent, transparent visions, so people can see, much like the Gantt or Sankey type diagram you showed up there, so people can see the impact of actions in one place on another. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done to demystify that, so we can quickly see an investment in this has these effects, because we can't see that right now. And a lot has to, in my opinion, a lot has to be done to democratize the process. One of the reasons why we're working with open source tools, and we're actively outreaching to lots and lots of universities, is that once the skill level is there and people are empowered, it means that you can make demands on governments, and it helps with entrepreneurs making new things. And I actually, secretly, while I'm all excited, I think that there's a massive urgency about this, because in this policy coherence space, part of the reason why there's not coherence is because there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. And the sooner we can make everything transparent and get the rules of the game sorted out now, the sooner we can sensibly make the compromises that we need to make. If we wait until there's another conflict, you know, then unpacking that is incredibly difficult. So I see that as being a very useful step in, because then your constituencies who help determine political will, because people want to stay in power, are empowered on the one hand, and on the other there's information to make informed decisions. And I think that's quite important.
can add one point. I don't know if you can hear me, and the audio doesn't come very well, but I also just wanted to make a comment, since the person who just asked the question, which I can entirely see, highlighted this institutional dimension, and indeed there is also something to be said about it's not just the policy coherence, but also about institutional coherence at all levels, at the global, the regional, and at the national level, which is very critical. That's really essential to promote policy coherence itself. And so there is, and I think this is where the question went for strengthening and institutional building, to create an institutional structure that indeed allows then the parties who are involved, the different parties who are involved, to come together and allows them to allow a policy decision process that is more coherent. So I think this is a very it's a very valid point. It's a very important point, so institutional capacity does need to go hand in hand with any other efforts for capacity building. I just wanted to add this point. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for just a couple of brief questions, so please keep them brief. We'll try to wrap things up in the next couple of minutes.
My name is Fabia Widman. I'm from Nord Forum, and I happen to be a member of the Baltic Development Forum. And the Baltic Development Forum takes these challenges that you mentioned. You are in the Baltic Council, aren't you? So you know that the Baltic Forum is having it's a very big conference in Stockholm, the coming fall. So these questions are always debated at the forum. I'm surprised that you haven't attended them. Nevertheless, I would like to thank Professor Raymond Vues for insisting on education, because what we really need is environmental maturity, and this comes only through education. So I would suggest, I will now write to the Development Forum and invite some of you who represent institutions here to come and insist on this particular issue. And education does not mean education of pupils, students, etc. It is educating our policy makers. Thank you. And this is SIDA can host this. I will talk with your boss. Thank you.
And did you have a question?
My name is Joydeep Datta. I'm a new professor in KTH. I've seen the other side of development aid, having been the vice president of Asian Institute of Technology. Mm-hmm. I completely agree with Ramon about the need for educating students. But on the other hand, I disagree with you that we have to have low-cost materials in developing countries to try and get them working to a certain level. When we break this enigma of trying to give a low-cost, lower-level, development aid or building up the technology there, I think the sustainable development ideas will come in much faster. What I'm trying to say is that bring in the advanced technologies that are developed down to these countries so that they don't make the same mistakes we have done in developed nations. Thank you.
Maybe a brief comment on the last comment. I was not proposing that bringing cheap or bad solution to developing world. It was just some examples that you, by very simple means, can make a Cisco router with the same functionality that loses less energy, and actually you could from that point start your business and sell that router and compete with Cisco. So that was a comment I want to make. So empowering the people to find and do something around. And I think many solutions will be very different. As Mark pointed out, I mean, we have built a grid because we start from centralized energy production. Well, if I have a lot of solar panels in my village, I will need a different solution. Or if I start with mobile banking, what I want to point out that the solutions in developing countries may be very different, and you speak about frugal innovation, you find different solutions, and I think it's very important for our engineers to also see the opportunities for finding these kind of new solutions. Because mobile banking was not invented in Sweden, but maybe it will actually kill all our banks, because we don't need the banks anymore. You can transfer money in a very different fashion. So I think there will be different solutions coming up with a different technology than what we use today. And these are some of the opportunities we should grasp.
Okay, well, we've reached 4:30, but before we conclude this event, I'd like to sneak in one question of my own. One of the themes for today, one of the objectives was to find ways to forge different partnerships and collaboration across institutions. And the institutions that this panel represents has had quite a bit of success in doing so. Do you have any recommendations on how to go about doing that, finding ways to cooperate to implement the SDGs? It's open to any of you or all of you.
We aim at developing this kind of strategic partnership. We have some strategic partnership with university in more developed area, more developed countries, but right now we try to discuss and find means to implement this kind of strategic partnerships along education and innovation to solve sustainable development goals.
At SIDA, as part of our own internal work in better understanding for ourselves also what our role is in relation to the global goals and what we are set to do, we have also introduced a series of seminars which are not only internal but also external. And I think sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, talking about topics together, meeting in these kind of forums as we're doing today, and also you are all welcome to SIDA, to the seminars. That could be a way of also increasing our partnerships and learning about each other and see where we can actually collaborate also in the future and how.
So I think this principle of universality could sort of characterize partnerships in the future. We found that was a success factor of this network I mentioned of research institutes. The fact that we had this kind of global reach and could draw on different experiences, perspectives, made it legitimate and strong and effective. So let's not think in terms of the developed country agenda and developing country agenda, but really look at our challenges sort of from a more universal point of view.
Yeah, and if I may, I think I'll take a slightly different track. I think something that's really important, and we've had the privilege of working with a number of these, is making sure that passion keeps burning for these problems and identifying and empowering champions. Whether they're young champions coming through a university system in different places, or folk in New York who are working under very stressed circumstances to try and build capacity. I think, if there's something that could be a valuable addition, it would be to try and harness some of that and create safe spaces where champions can develop some of these ideas and move forward. So it's a little bit not technology optimistic or talking about institutions or other things, but I think individuals play a really important role, and trying to harness that, I think, is something we could do maybe a better job at.
Maybe a comment on this last comment. Of course, two things again. I think it's a micro and the macro level we were addressing. And of course, the micro level, I think this will drive things by itself and will probably, of course, can be helped a lot by the partnership. But I think it's just a reflection coming to my mind if I look at the institution like the European Union or like United Nations, which are many times very heavily criticized, and of course they always do wrong things and so on. But still, these kind of fora are maybe very, very important for providing, let's say, the coherence that we were discussing previously and also pulling at the same time. This comes again a little bit to the political risks, I think, are probably, to my mind, the largest risk to achieve sustainable development goals, that we kind of step back and don't see the achievements we have done so far in creating those international bodies, which are quite important. They will maybe not make the change, but enable the coherence.
Monica, would you like to add anything to that, or any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to stress again what I was saying also initially in my presentation, that building capacity is indeed a collective effort. We perceive that as a collective effort, both in terms of we need to tap to broad base of expertise, but also broad base of resources around the world. We are struggling to respond to all the demands that we are receiving. The more we talk about, for example, the modeling tools, the more demands we receive, then we find ourselves really in need to create a strong partnerships and collaboration all over the world, and creating not just communities of practice, so all the researchers and academics who can participate in helping us developing more and more models that are more and more inclusive of different goals. But we also really need to create a strong network of research institutions in countries who can themselves then do this type of work in countries. So in this way, they can really help what is most critical about the agenda, to create a policy space at the national level for them to really to find their specific solutions to their specific problems. So I was actually very interested in the presentation from as a person, Amir and Palm, and you both talk about the network of research universities and institutions, and I wish I could be there in the mingling phase to discuss with you some of potential collaboration. So will not this be the case, but hopefully in the future we'll definitely hope there will be opportunities to be in touch on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. And speaking of the mingling phase, that is where we have arrived. It will take place up on the 11th floor of this building, so you can take the stairs if you're ambitious, or take the elevator up there. It'll last until 6 o'clock this evening. And also, today's event will be not including the mingle phase. I don't think that'll be filmed, but the rest, this part of the event will be available up on the website of the KTH Sustainability Office within the next day or two, I assume. So on behalf of the KTH Sustainability Office and on behalf of the Division of Energy Systems Analysis, I want to thank you all for attending today and hope to see you upstairs on the 11th floor.
Thank you.
We leave these here. So this was arranged by KTH.